Looking at our world from a theological perspective. This is the Theology Central Podcast, making theology central.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is Sunday, August the 15th, 2021. It is currently 4:21 p.m. Central Time, and I'm coming to you live from the empty sanctuary of Victory Baptist Church, located right here in Ovalo, Texas. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you are listening live this Sunday afternoon, feel free to jump into the chat and say hello, ask any questions, offer any comments. You do so via the Spreaker app. Hit the little chat icon. Very simple, very easy, free for you to use. And, well, it's a great way for your voice to let your voice be heard. Let your voice be known. Let your opinions be heard, right? So however you want to describe it, it's available to you. So please make use of that. If you are not listening to us live, you can always contact me via email, newsif@yahoo.com. That's newsif@yahoo.com. Now, we have a lot to do this afternoon, and I have been sitting here for about 30 minutes, maybe even longer, contemplating what should I do? How should I approach this? Because in this Bible study exercise today, we have to deal with a couple of issues. We have to deal with the issues on how exactly do you pronounce some of these names and the name of some of these places? How exactly do you pronounce them? Because what I have discovered in doing these Bible study exercises, and because again, I do these Bible study exercises in such a way to try to get you involved, right? So sometimes I teach it like I know it. Sometimes I teach it like I don't know it because I'm trying to get you involved. I'm trying to get you involved in the process. And very early on, if you've been following our Bible study exercises, the last 2 weeks, we were in the book of Revelation, right? We were in the book of Revelation. Hopefully you were participating in those studies. And when we came to the church of the Laodiceans, or the church of Laodicea, we immediately realized that most people pronounce it at the church of Laodicea, or the Laodiceans, not the Laodiceans. However, a little bit of research, I discovered, wait a minute, even though I think in every seminary, every Bible college, and every preacher, it's the church of Laodicea, all of a sudden I was told the Laodicea, all of a sudden I was told it's the church of Laodicea. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. So that one I learned. Well, when we get into the section we are this week, and this is part 2, part 3, what part are we on? This should be part 3, now that I'm thinking about it. Yes, this is part 3. Okay, I was like, wait a minute, did I name it incorrectly? So this is part 3, and our study, and I know it's only Sunday, and we're already in part 3, and our study of 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 29 to chapter 17, and I think we're going all the way down to verse 7. But what I've discovered this week, and I know when I say this week, I know we're early on in this week's study, but what I've discovered already is if you listen to a number of sermons, a number of people read these names and these places, everyone says them very differently, right? Ahab. Wait, Ahab? Wait, I thought it was always Ahab. I was wrong. Baal, Baal. I literally heard someone refer to it as Baal. And I was like, wait, so Baal, Baal, like there's a lot of disagreements on how to pronounce it. So I just want you to so we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to look at some of the words on how to pronounce things. And so that's one issue. I'm just going to bring it up just a little bit because some of these, I do want you to struggle with it as well. And I want you to just think about it because we always want to be I know it seems like an insignificant thing, right? Now, for some of you, it's a big deal, right? If a preacher doesn't pronounce something correctly to you, that's a big deal, and you're never going to listen to him again because he's a fool. And just remember, God didn't always choose the wisest to be pastors or the smartest. In many cases, he chose the foolish. He chose those who are foolish, those who are weak, those who are probably, in many cases, not even the most qualified. That's kind of how it happens sometimes. So for some people, it bothers them greatly. And I understand because you want to be accurate, but I just want you to realize that you can listen to 15 people and come up with 25 different ways of saying it. So if you listen to this morning when we did part 2 of this Bible study exercise, I kept saying Ahab, Ahab. I kept going back and forth. And the other day when I was like Baal, I kept changing it back and forth as well because I wanted you to be aware that there are different ways of saying these. So we'll just mention that briefly. I know it may not seem like an important thing, but hey, in the Bible study exercises, we can take time to discuss these different issues that may or may not be important. But so that's one issue we're going to be talking about today. And the other issue that I have to struggle with is how in depth, how much information do we pursue, and when do we have to realize, I think I think we've got enough, we can move on. How much is too much information? Because we have a situation here in front of us where we could literally pursue information, it feels like for weeks, maybe even months, possibly even a year. And I don't know if we could uncover everything about it. But at some point, you have to ask yourself, does all of that information really help us in the understanding of the text before us? All right. I'll just go ahead and give you what I'm talking about. And well, let's just go to the text. Let's do this. Let's go to 1 Kings. All right. Let's go to 1 Kings. So welcome everyone. Bible study exercise. Let me just get all of this out of the way very, 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 very quickly. Bible study exercise. What we're doing right now is each week we're picking a week-long study. This week it's 1 Kings chapter 16. 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 29 to chapter 17 of 1 Kings, verse 7. Right? That's what we're studying all of this week. Remember, for these week-long studies, your job is to read the text over and over and over and over and over, create a basic outline, and then I give you different assignments, and then hopefully you're sending me your work. Someone sent me their work this morning. It was pages on some of the things we're getting ready to talk about, and I love seeing that. They went in, they went to work, they put forth that effort. Thank you so much. I want everyone to participate, but thank you. So we're doing these Bible study exercises. Remember, there is curriculum available. If you go to theologycentral.net, go to the blog section, follow the link for the first blog article right there. It's called like Daily Discipleship Guide. There's a link to ministrygrid.com. You register, you get access to all of the curriculum. It's absolutely free. Now, it's not free for us. And for right now, I guess I could say it's free for us because a listener basically paid so that all of you could get free access to the curriculum. So one individual on their own went to theologycentral.net, went to the donate tab, and gave money to, support your access to the curriculum. So please use it. There's still empty seats. We want to fill them all up, but we only want them filled with people who are going to use the curriculum and going to engage in the Bible study. That's what we want. So I got to keep saying all of that, but that's what's going on. So I realize it's interesting. I've seen that the numbers for the Bible study exercises have increased dramatically. They definitely have increased. I can't see the emails of people participating has increased, but the number of people listening has increased. So maybe that's a positive sign. I don't know. All I can do is just keep doing the work each and every day, putting forth these Bible study exercises, trying to get you involved, I feel there is such a burden that I feel right now, that I feel that American Christianity is so distracted and so far off the path that I am doing everything I can to just get into the scriptures, get into the scriptures, get into the scriptures. And I hope that I'm accomplishing that. I hope I'm doing what I can. I think what we're trying to do here is very unique. I mean, a podcast where we're doing not just teaching the Bible, but trying to do a Bible study exercise, leading you into the actual study, taking you through all the steps, giving you homework, giving you the ability to send me your assignments, giving you access to curriculum. I think we're doing a lot of people doing these kinds of things would put a lot of this content behind a Patreon wall and charge you $5 or $10 a month. Okay, I don't want to charge you anything. So I think that we're trying to do something unique and open for everyone to participate. So I hope that you're finding it to be beneficial. So are you ready? So here's what we got to figure out. How to pronounce certain words. Okay, we're going to mention that. Okay, I'll just show you. I've already given you a couple of hints. And then How much is too much? What information is absolutely necessary right here? And if you missed part 2, please go listen to part 2. I did part 2 during the Sunday school hour this morning at Victory Baptist Church. I listened to most of it on the way driving home to church, or driving home from church and driving back here to the church. There's one section I kind of messed up on a little bit. I wasn't happy, where I'm reading from the curriculum. I got confused in my own mind there a little bit. I don't know why. I don't think it's major. I don't think it's a major issue, and I don't know how noticeable it may be. But other than that, I think we had a very important conversation about government, about culture wars, and please go listen to part 2. Please go listen to part 2. I think it's very, very, very important. I ask your forgiveness for the mistake I made. I made a couple of mistakes, but there's one that I don't know why. I got confused in reading it, and well, we won't go into that right now. So are you ready? All right, here we go. 1 Kings, chapter 16. And one of the things I just want you to realize, the way we're doing these Bible study exercises is with the curriculum. I'm letting the curriculum choose what we cover. So I love this because it forces me to deal with a text of Scripture that possibly if I just looked at, I would be like, okay, I don't know what to do with that. I like that challenge. One of my favorite things to do when I was in my first Bible Institute is when we would come in on a Saturday and they would have a kind of a bucket there and all these pieces of paper folded up in the bucket, and you would have to just reach in and pull out, and it would be a scriptural text. It would be a text of Scripture. And you had to go off, in the building somewhere. You had a couple of hours and to basically write a sermon, and then you would come back and have to preach that sermon. You didn't get to pick what you wanted to preach, but it was going to demonstrate your ability to take the text apart and see what's there and handle it correctly. I love that exercise, and so to me, this is the same way. I open up the curriculum just like you do. I'm like, oh wow, we're in 1 Kings 16. Okay. What do I do with this? I love that challenge. Because as a Christian, if all you ever do is read what you want to read and study what you want to study, that really is going to hurt your spiritual growth. Okay, so I know a lot of times people, I even see people do it in church. It drives me crazy. It's like, okay, I really love what we're doing on Sunday mornings, Pastor. That's awesome. I can't wait. And they'll show up for every service Sunday morning. You can just tell they're not that interested on what we're doing in Sunday night, and they'll start missing on Sunday night. If you only go for what you want, if you only go for what interests you, you can't grow. You've got to be able to be willing to listen to maybe whatever you're not necessarily interested in at the time, because it's very important. It's God's word, so all of it is important. So again, just a practical lesson here. All right, here we go. 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 29. In the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah. So let's start right here. This morning, for some reason, as saying eighth, I said 8. In the 38th year of Asa, I don't know what I was doing this morning. I was saying something incorrectly. And in the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, began, I am going to say Ahab. All right. I was listening to, I think the Blue Letter Bible app. They have the ability where, it's an audio Bible, and they did not say Ahab. They said Ahab. But I'm going to go with Ahab. All right. So, and the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, began Ahab, the son of Omri, to reign over Israel. And Ahab, the son of Omri, reigned over Israel and Samaria 22 years. Everybody got that? Very simple, very straightforward. And Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord above all that were before him. And it came to pass, as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, that he took to wife Jezebel, the daughter of Baal, king of the Zidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. And he reared up an altar for Baal and the house of Baal, which he had built in Samaria. Now, stop right here. Now, first, just with pronunciations. Again, I'm going to go with Ahab. That's just the way I've always said it. Ahab may be more correctly, but I'm just going to go with Ahab. Baal is the way I think is correct. I've heard Baal. I've heard Baal. I'm going to go with Baal. That's the way I'm going to go. All right. I just think you have to break that up. Baal. I just think you have to do it that way. All right. But here's what I want you to see. So there's just a couple of things there about some pronunciations. Just wanted to at least mention that already. Now, when we look at this text this morning, I really focused on the fact that you really have a change of governmental power here. And the change, everything goes horribly, horribly bad for Israel and goes bad theologically and goes bad spiritually. So this morning we spent about an hour really tracing the concept of governmental powers, political powers, law, throughout the Bible, and I think we learned some very important lessons. So I want you to go listen to that. So we see that there again in verse 29, and in the 8th year of Asa, king of Judah, began Ahab, the son of Omri, to reign over Israel, and Ahab, the son of Omri, reigned over Israel and Samaria 22 years. For some reason, I think this morning, I was reading that as Omri was reigning, not Ahab. I got all very, very confused, but okay. But I don't think I made any major mistakes. I think in my brain I was making more mistakes than my mouth was making. All right. And Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord above all that were before him. So the main thing is Ahab starts reigning. Ahab, the son of Omri, he reigns over Israel for in Samaria 22 years. So 22 years he reigns, and he does evil in the sight of the Lord above all that were before him. So we have a wicked ruler. We have a wicked governmental structure. We have a wicked, in a sense, politician. We have a wicked monarchy. And Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord above all that were before him. And it came to pass, as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sons of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, that he took to wife Jezebel, the daughter of Baal, king of the Zidonians, and went and served Baal and worshiped him. Now, here's what we need to figure out. This text refers to Baal and Baal worship a number of times, demonstrating to me that this is significant we believe this is inspired by the Holy Spirit. This is significant. The writer, the Holy Spirit inspiring this, God believes clearly this is significant in this historical narrative. It's a historical narrative, but this worship of Baal is extremely important. So how much about Baal worship do you and I need to know in order to better understand this text and to better understand the historical setting? How much do we need to understand about Baal worship? How much? Now, literally, there are books written about this. There are papers written about this. We could spend literally hours going through all the details. Now, we're going to spend a considerable amount of time, but I just want you to see that when you're doing Bible study, sometimes you're faced with these decisions. Okay, what do I need to know about Baal worship? What do we need to know? And I just want you to see how this plays out. So, Jezebel's the daughter of Baal. Baal is right there in the name. All right. The name even, I don't have it in front of me. In fact, maybe I do. Let's see. Let me look here. I may have it here in front of me. I think this is in the curriculum itself. If you look in the curriculum, I may have it in my notes from this morning. Let's see here. That's on predestination. That's what we talked about this morning. Here we go. Let's see here. Did I mention it this morning? All right. Yes, Baal. With him is Baal, or Baal. All right. With him is Baal. That's what his name means. So Jezebel is the daughter of Baal, which means with him is Baal. I mean, that right there is telling you with this individual is Baal, this false god. So obviously this text is, obviously that says a lot. That gives you a little bit of Jezebel's upbringing, obviously. Gives us the theological background of that she comes from. He's the king of the Zidonians and went and served, and Ethbaal was king of the Zidonians. So let's go read this again. So it came to pass as it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, that he took, this is Ahab, he takes to wife, he took to wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal of the Zidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. So now we have the king of Israel, Ahab, who's married Jezebel, and he's now worshiping Baal, and that's who he's following. He's not following the true God, he's following Baal. And he reared up an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he had built in Samaria. Now, there is a lot. I mean, Baal is mentioned multiple times. He's worshiping him. He reared up an altar in the house of Baal. It sounds like there's an altar, there's a temple, there is worship. And here's the leader of Israel, the leader, in a sense, of God's people, worshiping a false god. And you know the people are going to end up following this. And then Ahab made a grove. We'll talk about that as well. So pronunciations, just know you'll hear so many different ways of saying it. You may not think it matters. It matters to try to be as accurate as we can, but at the same time, we don't want to be so nitpicky, go, well, that preacher got the names wrong and he said that wrong, so I'm not going to listen to him. You don't want to be so arrogant as well. There's a balance we have to find there. There's a balance. But we have to decide when it comes to Baal, how much do we need to know? How much do we need to know? So I've got two sources here. I've got an article, and I've got right here the Bible dictionary. I know this is going to be a kind of a slow, painstaking process. At times it may feel tedious, but I think this is beneficial because I want you to see that because as we're going through this, I want you to keep asking for every bit of information we come across, right? I'm going to try to go slow through each piece of information. I want you to stop and ask yourself, how does that information help us understand this text? And it helps us, grow in our understanding of the text so that we can have a better understanding and a better interpretation of it. For example, in our study of Revelation 3, when we studied the city of Laodicea, I can't even explain to you how critical that was in interpreting the text. If we did not study the city of Laodicea, we were not going to properly interpret that section of Revelation chapter 3. It's that simple. But when it comes to this section, I'm not feeling that same, like if we do not understand Baal, if we don't understand the worship of Baal, the deity of Baal, if we don't understand this, then we can't interpret the text correctly. I feel like that there's a level that we need to know. Then I think that there's some things that we don't need to know. But I'm going to let you try to figure that. I want you to struggle with that yourself. I want you to struggle with it a little bit, okay? How much do we need to know here? So that because here's a situation. This is a situation where we can miss the forest because of the trees. In other words, we get so deep into the forest that we always see is the individual trees that we miss the forest itself. I don't want us to miss the major idea here of this text because we're down here going, okay, Baal this. Okay, here's Baal. Okay, then we know this about Baal. Okay, we know this. This name, this deity does this. Here's all of these because there's at least two streams of kind of myths and stories about Baal that we could explore. I think one comes from Egypt, and I believe one comes from Syria. I believe I'd have to go back and look. And just reading all of those stories, they're very interesting. All of the mythology, you can see a lot of interesting things about it, and you could go, wow, that's interesting. But when it comes down to it, does all of that information help me actually understand what's going on here in 1 Kings? So we're going to have to work through this and try to decide. All right. So let's do this first. we've done this a little bit already, but let's just do it one more time. Now remember, Blue Letter Bible, remember I try to take you through the process. So if you have the Blue Letter Bible app, go ahead and open it. Blue Letter Bible app. Go to 1 Kings chapter 16. All right. And go down to verse 31. Click on verse 31. Open up your interlinear. Okay. And let's see here. And there's Baal. And let's learn a little bit about the Hebrew word for Baal. Here we go.
Strong's H 1168. Baal.
Here we go.
Just below that.
Baal. There's in the Hebrew, Baal, all right? Baal is how, from my understanding, is the way we're supposed to say it in English, but Baal is in Hebrew. Now, what does it mean? Well, it's used 80 times. That's just very significant. It's used 80 times. It is translated 62 times as Baal and 18 times as Balaam. Now, the fact that it's used 80 times and translated, that means Baal, or Baal, I should say it that way, Baal, the English word, Baal, it's used 62 times in the King James. Now, right there tells me, okay, this is significant. So understanding Baal is not only significant to some level and trying to figure out what's going on in 1 Kings 16 and 17, clearly understanding Baal is very important because it's used that many times in the Bible. I mean, 62 times? 62 times. Think of how many, some very important concepts in the Bible. Think of how many times how many times is baptism mentioned versus how many times Baal is mentioned. I mean, think about that. Some of these things that are mentioned very few times. For example, the Lord's Supper. How many times is it mentioned? We have an entire doctrine surrounding baptism, entire doctrines surrounding the Lord's Supper. We have entire doctrines surrounded about how church government should work based off maybe the use of the word elders or this or that. We have entire doctrinal systems built around words maybe used far less than 62 times. So it's used 62 times. How much do we know about Baal and how much do we need to know? All right. Now, here's Strong's definition. Very simple. Baal, a Phoenician deity. Plural, Balaam. All right. The word Baal means Lord. So Lord, that's interesting. It's a supreme, now this is very important, male divinity of the Phoenicians or Canaanites. So Baal, meaning Lord, is a male divinity, a supreme male divinity. Now that's very important because when you get to the idea of the grove mentioned here in 1 Kings, for example, in verse 33, and Ahab made a grove, and Ahab did more to provoke the Lord God of Israel to anger than all the kings of Israel that were before him. The grove there, I think, is connected to a female deity, where you have basically the female deity and Baal is the male deity. So just keep that in mind. I think that may give us a little insight to what's going on here between Baal, the house, the altar, and then the grove. The grove is for the female deity. The altar, the house, is for the male deity. But that you may find something interesting there. Maybe not. We'll see. All right. So there gives us a little bit of, now we could go through the very first time the Hebrew word Baal is used. It is in Judges chapter 2, verse 11. Sometimes the first usage is of importance. Judges 2:11, and the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served Balaam. So immediately, why is this important? Because Baal, is clearly a major source of temptation for the children of Israel. So false gods, false worship, idolatry is a serious source of temptation for God's people in the Old Testament. False worship and idolatry was a major source of temptation for God's people in the Old Testament. And I think we can see that over and over and over, right? We see that in Exodus 32 when they build the golden calf. Why are they building a golden calf? Why? I think when we get into the study of Baal, we may get some answers there, which will be interesting. But I just think that's significant, right? Because here, when we go to 1 Kings 16, we have a king of Israel who's bringing in Baal worship, building an altar, in fact, let me read it to you again, 1 Kings 16. All right. He reared up an altar for Baal and the house of Baal, which he had built in Samaria. So he builds an altar, he builds a house to Baal, and then he builds a grove, and he's worshiping him. And the people of Israel clearly have found themselves doing this kind of thing all the way back in Judges. Now, here's a question. And I think this is just a very important application kind of question for you to think about. Why is false worship and idolatry such a temptation for the people of God in the Old Testament? And do you think idolatry, false worship, is just as much a temptation for people today? Now, we may not be bowing down to a golden statue or to an image, but there is, it's almost, I think this is some truth to this. The human heart is an idolatry factory. The human heart is an idolatry factory. I think that quote is usually attributed to John Calvin. Whomever said it, and there's truth to it. The human heart produces idolatry. It's the heart just worships. It worships what it wants to worship. It almost creates things to worship. So Baal Baal is obviously a true deity of the Canaanites, the Phoenicians. It was a true historical deity. But I wonder, in a more broader sense, does Baal represent just the tendency, and from an application standpoint, I wonder if Baal kind of represents and stands for just the temptation of false worship and idolatry that all people struggle with. I mean, the old saying, we're all going to worship something, from a Bob Dylan song. Everyone's going to worship something. We're going to worship something. Why? And I think what we have a tendency to do, we tend to worship what we want to worship more than worship what is true. I mean, there's a lot of important questions that we could have here, but it's just interesting that the first passage, and just look at this, and this may be more important than anything else we do here. All right, so Baal, Judges 2:11, and the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served Balaam. Judges 2:13. And they forsook the Lord and served Baal and Ashtaroth. Now, just remember that name Ashtaroth, because that's going to come into play here in a little bit. Judges 3:7, and the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and forgot the Lord their God and served Balaam and the groves. See, now we're getting some cross-references that directly relates to 1 Kings. Judges 6:25, and it came to pass the same night that the Lord said unto him, take thy father's young bullock, even the second bullock of 7 years old, and throw down the altar of Baal that thy father hath, and cut down the grove that is by it. So we have Baal and we have groves there in Judges. And we have here that clearly it's a source of temptation for Israel. All right, and then you can just go through and we could just read all of them, but over and over again. Judges 10:6, Judges chapter 10, verse 6. And the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord and served Balaam and Ashtaroth and the gods of Syria and the gods of Zidon and the gods of Moab and the gods of the children of Ammon and the gods of the Philistines, and forsook the Lord and served him not. How many times does this happen? It's just interesting that this is a common problem. So you may want to go through I would challenge you to go through all of the references that mentions Baal, Balaam, go through all of them and just kind of get a sense of what's going on in the Bible with Baal, this false god, this false deity, this male deity, this supreme male deity of the Phoenicians and the Canaanites. Just really get a grasp of it, because I think it says something about you and I. Because we are creating the image of God, there's a spiritual aspect to it. So we're going to worship something. It's just our tendency is to worship everything other than God. We have a desire to worship. We just have a tendency to worship anything and everything other than God. We tend to worship the counterfeit. We tend to worship the alternative. Here's the true God, but here's the worship alternative. I think this is very, very important in understanding it. All right. Now, so we could go through all of those scriptures. We could, but again, I've got to figure out how much do we need. I really challenge you to do that. But let's see what we must know. Here, this article is called your must know guide to Baal. Now, this is what they believe is your must-know guide. Here's some of the things they say. Over the years, as you have studied the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament, you've certainly come across the many passages where references were made to Baal. You no doubt know that Baal was a fertility god worshipped by the nations which surrounded Israel. You know that Israel went through periods of time when they allowed Baal worship to infiltrate their own society. And you know that Baal worship was one of the main reasons God became angry at Israel and imposed judgment on them at various occasions. So I want you to this is very, 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 very important. I really want you to think about this. Israel would find themselves living in a society that worshiped other gods and other deities. And then Israel, instead of staying true to their worship and their God, would compromise and worship the deities of the surrounding area. But here's the question. Did they embrace fully the worship of the nations around them, or did they try to incorporate the worship of Baal into the worship of the true God and corrupt the worship of the true God? Was it simply like, that's it, we're done with the true God, we're done with Jehovah, Yahweh? We can get to a discussion about how to say that. There's a big discussion there. Do we throw that out so that we can worship Baal, or did they try to kind of merge the two, try to corrupt the true God worship with the false god worship in order to get along with society? Was that their motivation? Do we have a tendency as Christians to bring our idolatry? Our heart is an idolatry factor. Do we bring our idolatry and we try to bring it in and merge it and corrupt the worship of the true God with our idolatry, but we don't realize it's idolatry? We still claim we're worshiping the true God. I mean, this is something to consider here. But clearly, Israel has a problem. No one can dispute that. This is what they have to say. Why an understanding of Baal worship is relevant to understanding the Bible? Now, they believe, this article, that understanding Baal worship is key to understanding your Bible, not just 1 Kings chapter 16. Now, I still got to figure out how much do I need to know about Baal worship to figure out what's going on here in this text. I think I have to understand Baal worship to understand the grove. I do think that those two go together. I don't think there's any question there. I think understanding Baal worship, once again, who do we see? We see a king of Israel. So we see Israel involved with it again. I think that's interesting to note. But how will it help me understand the rest of the Bible? Let's see what they have to say. According to them, if you have studied the Bible for any significant length of time, you have probably done at least a little bit of background research on this religion. Now, it'd be interesting to know how many Christians have actually done background research. I think that's overly optimistic. I think there are very few Christians. I think there's Christians who read their Bible, it says Baal. They're like, oh, false god, and they just move on. They don't stop to go, where did this Baal god arise from? What's the basic tenets of Baal worship? What did Baal worship teach about this? I really believe most Christians have never done any background research study at all, okay? Most Christians don't even own a Bible dictionary, for crying out loud. Most Christians don't even look anything up. So, and I stand by that just from my experience within Christianity. There's always those studious Christians who will look these things up. But it would be interesting to know how many times you've studied Baal in any meaningful way, or your church has studied it in any meaningful way. But you have probably never looked at it from a worldview perspective. Today, we want to remedy that situation by gaining this more in-depth knowledge of Baal worship. Two things should happen for you. First, you will be able to understand more fully the implications of what is being taught in the Bible when you come across references to this religion. All right, so according to them, the more we understand about this background, the more we understand about Baal worship, we'll understand the background when it is referenced. So, in other words, we want to understand the background of 1 Kings chapter 16, where it says this, that verse 31, 1 Kings 16:31, and it came to pass, as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the sons of Nebat, that he took to wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Zidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him and reared up an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he had built in Samaria. In other words, if we really want to understand the significance of that, we have to understand the background and we have to understand Baal worship. Then we can understand really the background and the significance of what's going on here. All right, I'm willing to accept that. I think that's makes some sense. So again, they said if we're going to understand and fully and understand more fully the implications of what is being taught in the Bible when you come across cross references to this religion. Secondly, it would give you more insight into certain modern religions that are becoming more prominent in our day. Not that Baal worship per se is once again practiced, but as a religion based on animistic worldview that has much in common with the other forms of animistic belief. So they're saying that there's an animistic worldview that if we understand Baal worship, we can understand this animistic worldview that has lots in common with animistic belief. Now, you may be like, what is animistic? What is that referring to? Well, animism is this. This is how animism is defined. Animism is a doctrine that the vital principle of organic development is immaterial spirit. Attribution of conscious life to objects and a phenomenon of nature or to inanimate objects. So animism would give attribution or attribute conscious life to objects or the nature to inanimate objects. That's interesting. It's a belief in the existence of spirits separable from bodies. All right? So their argument is if we understand Baal worship, then we'll have a better understanding into modern religions that have become prominent in our day. All right? We'll have to see there. Again, what we want to know is how is it going to help us understand 1 Kings 16? Right? Here's the history of Baal worship. Baal worship was the most prominent religious system of the Canaanite people groups, which surrounded Israelite culture during the time when Israel occupied the Promised Land after they fled Egypt. So Israel is in this land, and they are surrounded by a people who their prominent religion was Baal worship. So here's Israel surrounded by a culture that their prominent religion is Baal, and guess what happens? The culture is influencing God's people more than God's people is influencing the culture. Does that not sound familiar? Does that not sound familiar? The animistic belief system had its roots in ancient Babylon and northern Syria. So, okay, I think I said Egypt. They have Babylon and northern Syria. Now, I would have to look at all sources to see if there's any other arguments there, but okay. Now, this is very interesting. Baal worship centered around a god named Baal, who was the leader of the gods. The Semitic word Baal literally means Lord or master. When we looked up the Hebrew, that's what we found. He was understood to be the storm god who was responsible for bringing rain and thus fertility to the land. Now, those are two things that all sources seem to agree. Baal is connected with rain and fertility. Rain and fertility. And when you get into a lot of this, there is a lot of sexual symbolism and overtones there that I will not try to get all into, but there is a lot there to unpack the more you get into this. There is a mythological story that tells the background of Baal worship. I believe there's actually two mythological stories that come from two different parts of the world, is my understanding. They say one, we could go deeper if we wanted. Again, I got to figure out how much do we need to know here. It seems that at some point in the history of the gods, this is according to one of the stories, there came a rivalry between Baal and Yam, Y-A-M-M, the sea god. So at some point, this is according to the mythology here. You have Baal, who finds himself in some conflict with the sea god. Ultimately, Baal defeated the sea god, Yam, Y-A-M-M, or Yam, with the help of his sister, Anat, the goddess of war, and Ashtaroth, or Asherah, the goddess of earth and fertility. Asherah becomes Baal's consort. All right, they use the word consort there. Okay. Because of his victory, other gods began to build a great house for Baal so he could be at rest and provide plenty of rain for the earth. But the god of death and the underworld, Mot, challenged Baal and temporarily defeated him. For a period of time, Baal disappeared into the underworld, but Anat and the sun god Shephash brought him back to life and restored him to his house. It was believed that as a part of the process, Baal went to live in the underworld during the dry wintry season. Then when spring came, he would return to earth to sleep with his consort, Asherah, so that the rains would return to the land. So, rain and fertility, when he would sleep or have basically sexual relations with his consort, then you would get the rain. And, well, there's a lot of things going on there that we won't get too explicit about, okay? Now, a couple of things. Let's just remember this. If you pay any attention to some atheistic blogs or agnostic blogs, they're very quick to go to pagan religions, like maybe the religion of Baal and other, and find what they think are similarities to the story of Christ. Things that are similar. Okay, death, resurrection, goes back to the house or goes back to heaven. So Christ comes to earth, he dies, he is buried, he raises again, and then he ascends and goes back. And they'll find some of the things here of Baal. He disappears because he's like defeated. He goes away. Then he is brought back to life. Then he goes back to the house. And they'll say, see, Christianity stole it from it. Now, are there similarities with some pagan religions and the things within Christianity? Now, you could argue there are similarities. Similarities does not mean one copied from another. We could think about this. Whenever we get into the Bible, especially when we get into deeper into the Bible, in the book of Revelation, and we start learning about Christ, we know that, or learning about Satan, I should say. We know that Satan is, in a sense, always taking this idea of the Antichrist as wants to supplant God, supplant the worship of Christ with the worship of himself. Therefore he appears as an angel of light. He uses deception. He uses fraud. He has, false prophets, false teachers. He tries to imitate. He tries to supplement by by forgery, he tries to create a fraudulent form of worship that mimics the true form of worship. He tries to corrupt worship with a false Christ, a false prophet, a false everything, but it mimics, in a sense, the true. So I'm not shocked that false religion may have some similarities, but I believe that that is ultimately Satan's goal, to always try to copy in some way, shape, or form. Now, yes, Baal worship precedes Christ coming far in advance. There's no question about that. But I would not be shocked that false religion would have that Satan would work false religion in some way, shape, or form that would have some kind of similarity in some way, shape, or form. So similarity does not mean one copied from the other. It just means that there could be a deeper spiritual reason for that taking place. All right. Let's see here. Do we hear here? We have the history. All right. So he sleeps with Asherah, and so the rains would return to the land. Basic beliefs and practices of Baal worship. The purpose of the Baal myth, when I say Baal myth, was to give human beings an explanation for the workings of nature, particularly as related to the production of rain for the crops of the agrarian people who lived in that region of the world. Baal, temporarily going to the underworld, represented dry season or periods of drought when not much rain fell. The rainy season represented the resuscitation of Baal, which allowed him to return to the land of the living and provide rain. There is also a contrast between Baal, the god of rain, fresh water, Yam, the god of the sea, salt water. It is only the fresh water of rain that is able to provide for the fertility of the ground, so Baal must win out. The practice of Baal worship by humans, though, was focused on the element of fertility. It was believed by those who worship Baal that human beings were able to help strengthen Baal and his struggle with Mot by taking certain actions. These actions specifically involved performing magic, engaging in certain rituals, which included child sacrifice and sexual interaction with sacred prostitutes. The magic rituals and sexual activity were all designed to encourage Baal's return to mate with Asherah so that they could bring the rains. The worship of Baal was generally performed in high places. There were typically temples or clearings up on mountains. Please note the use of high places. When you see high places in the Bible, that's Baal worship. Over and over and over. And you're going to see Israel struggling with this time and time and time again. And let me just say, any worship that says you can help your God out by sleeping with a sacred prostitute, it's probably going to be popular, at least amongst the men of that society. I think we could possibly agree with that. Or let's just say this. Let's not even use it that way. It's going to be popular with anyone who has strong fleshly desires they would like to fulfill with the use of a sacred prostitute, because they could say, I'm helping God out. So it would be a religion that would appeal to the flesh. All right? Now, they break down kind of what Baal believed in regards to God, to man, to salvation. I'll just go through these quickly. Essential beliefs of Baal worship. God. As a somewhat traditional animistic religion, Baal worship believes in many gods, which are primarily associated with elements of nature. It is believed that these gods live in the spirit world, but are connected to the material world, all right? What happens in the spirit world affects what goes on in the material world and vice versa. Baal, in particular, is the storm god providing rain. He is responsible for the earth's fertility. What is Baal worship believes in regards to man? Mankind in the Baal religion is understood to be a physical being who lives in the material world but has a spiritual core. It is believed that human beings will enter the spirit world at physical death and will then have influence over what happens in the material world. In the meantime, human beings affect what goes on in the spirit world by means of rituals, prayers, and offerings like child sacrifice, like maybe some kind of offering, or engaging with a sacred prostitute. Salvation for human beings and Baal worship relates to doing all one can to make life as comfortable as possible. This involves helping and encouraging the gods to fulfill their obligation towards the material world, as well as appeasing the gods to make all personal life more comfortable. So it seems like the goal here is comfort, making life all more comfortable, which would again be very pleasing to the flesh. All right, there is Baal worship. Now, I was going to go with two sources. I have a source right here, the Nelson's New Illustrated Bible Dictionary, which we have here in our church. They have a lot to say about Baal. They have a lot. Let's see here. Okay, this is interesting. I'm just going to try to pick some things out here. And, well, man, we're at 55 minutes. Oh, we didn't even get close. All right, here we go. I'm just going to jump into the dictionary here and read a couple of things. Baal and related deities are also portrayed as a mating bull. Now, that's interesting. According to the Bible dictionary here, Baal is sometimes referenced or symbolized as a mating bull. Keep that in mind. Symbolizing fertility. Well, that's interesting. It is no surprise that while Moses was on Mount Sinai receiving the 10 Commandments from the Lord, the disobedient Israelites fashioned a golden calf to worship. Jeroboam I, king of Israel, acted in accordance with this pagan idea by making 2 calves of gold, setting up one at Bethel and the other at Dan. You can read about this in 1 Kings 12, 26 through 30. So this may explain the whole golden calf issue. It's coming from Baal. That may be very interesting. During the history of the Israelites, a rivalry developed between Balaam and the true worshipers of the Lord. Perhaps the best example of this rivalry was the conflict between Elijah and the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. Elijah's challenge to them to bring down fire from heaven was appropriate because the Canaanites believed that Baal could shoot lightning flashes from the sky. Elijah's mocking of Baal struck at the heart of their claims. He knew that Baal was powerless, and that the prophets of Baal had misled the people, and that only the Lord God of Israel was alive and able to answer. And the struggle to the death between true religion and false religion, Elijah knew that Baalism and its prophets had to be destroyed. All right. Now there's goes on right there, but again, it just shows you the golden calf, the golden calf issue that shows up. So we've kind of figured out the high places, Baal, golden calves, connection with Baal. Now we got to figure out the grove. We got to figure out the grove here. Now, I don't have time to go in great detail, but I think this is interesting. I'm going to go to the curriculum. Again, if you want access to the curriculum, it's free of charge. Go to theologycentral.net. Go to theologycentral.net. I'm going to have to log in really quick. Go to theologycentral.net. Go to the blog. And when you're there, you're going to see the first article. And then you can sign up. And it's all free. I do want you to use it. Okay. I'm going to go to the adult study guide when this loads. Give me 1 second. The adult personal study guide. Because they have something in this about the grove that I think is interesting. All right, here we go. Keyword, grove. Monument to the fertility goddess, Asherah. Artwork from the time suggests plain and carved poles, trees, and even tree stumps as representative of sacred groves. All right. So the grove was a monument to the fertility goddess, not the male deity, Baal. That's the male deity. The female deity is the fertility goddess Asherah. And from that time suggest plain and carved poles. Now, let's remember Asherah. Does that name sound familiar? Asherah, does that sound familiar? All right. Now, remember, Baal would return to mate with Asherah so there could be rains. Asherah was his, I think they used the word, I can't remember the word they used, consort or whatever the word they used. But that's the one Baal would mate with. Baal is the male deity, Asherah is the female deity, and the grove was for her. All right. Let me go to, I'm just going to go to a couple of commentaries here that talks about the grove. All right. And Ahab made a grove. I think in some translations, they have it translated as the Asherah, not as the grove, but as the Asherah. That is the image which was to represent the female divinity of which Baal was the male. And made a grove. Now, this says in the Hebrew, Asherah, image of Astarte, a female figure corresponding to the male effigy just described, which would be Baal. All right. The Asherah belonging to the temple of Baal. All right. So it sounds like the grove basically was related to Asherah. And there we go. I could go into more. It's just interesting that it corresponds with Baal because if there's going to be rain, he has to engage in this relationship with the female deity, and that brings rain and fertility. They engage in that, and that brings fertility and life upon the earth. That's the way they understood it. And I guess you could help that out by sleeping with a sacred prostitute, which again makes this a very fleshly religion. A very fleshly religion. And we find that Baal worship is very tempting to the people of God, and that the true worship of God stood in great contrast and was in great conflict to it. Now, here's the reason why. I want to make it very clear. All forms of false worship almost always appeal to the flesh. Christianity is a religion that calls for denying self, taking up a cross, and following him, denying the flesh, which makes Christianity at times extremely unpopular, which you could understand why. All right, there you go. When we didn't get into more detail about the grove, but we were able to, I think that's a good hour of work. I think it's a good hour of work. We talked a little bit about pronunciation. Baal. I always want to say Baal. I always want to say it that way because I think that's the way it was taught. But Baal, I think, is the correct way. And then we heard it in the Hebrew. All right, so we talked a little bit about pronunciation. Ahab, right, we talked about that. There were some others that we could have discussed. And then we got into a lengthy discussion about Baal and the grove. Now, here's what I want. At least you have the background, right? You have enough background there to understand. So here's what we have. Let's go back to 1 Kings. We'll end this way. Let's go back to 1 Kings because I want to bring this to some kind of important conclusion. 1 Kings chapter 16. Here's what we have. In 1 Kings 16, I'm going to call this, we have the political context, which is in the 30th and 8th year of Asa, king of Judah, began Ahab, the son of Omri, to reign over Israel. And Ahab, the son of Omri, reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. And Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord above all that were before him. And it came to pass, as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, that he took to wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Zidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. We have two things going on in verse 29 to verse 32. We have the political context and we have the theological context. Political context, wicked king who's going to rule for 22 years. The theological concept is he's going to institute and make Baal worship the primary god, the deity for everyone to worship, with an altar, a house, and he's going to build a grove to the female deity Asheroth as the female counterpart to Baal, because guess what? That they have to come together so that we get rain on the earth. Right? That's the background. That sets it all up. All right. Then verse 34 is interesting. In his days did Hael, the Bethelite, build Jericho. Now, verse 34 is very interesting. We could ask a lot of questions. Why is verse 34 there? We could ask that question. But then immediately in chapter 17, and Elijah the Tishbite. Here's what I want you to realize. Christianity, throughout all of its history, even going back to Israel, over and over and over, God's people find itself living in a world where you have governmental hostility and theological hostility to the things of God. I will argue that Christianity is never to overcome those things through political force and culture wars, but by living out and serving our God. And we talked about that this morning, but we won't go further into that. All right, there you go. 1 hour of teaching, absolutely free, not put behind a paywall. Okay, there you go. I would love to get your thoughts on all of this. You can email me your thoughts, newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. Thanks to, I won't say her name on the air. Thanks for sending me all of your notes this morning. You did a great job. Lots of interesting things. I think she did far better than I did on the Grove right there. I didn't have time to go into further detail, but you get the basic idea. That's why in Judges, they were to tear down basically the altar of Baal and to tear down the groves, because the groves and Baal, they go together. They're connected, right? So I think that's interesting. All right. There we go. No questions came into the chat. So that's the way I interpret. When I don't get anybody comes into the chat and asks any questions, I interpret that to mean my teaching was so on point. Nobody could even ask a question because I was answering the questions before they could even be asked. Okay. Yeah. I don't really think that way, but I can pretend. I can give that pretend that I'm that confident, but I'm not. All right. Thank you very much for listening. Everyone have a great day. Please, this week, work on this study. Please engage in this study. Let me know what you're learning. Tell me what you think about the curriculum, what you think is great. Just any feedback is always helpful. All right. Everyone have a great week. I may be back on the air one more time here shortly. All right. God bless.